Welcome back to the Fit Minute Podcast, Fitness for Real People, with your host, Gabrielle Mazar. On today's episode, Gabrielle interviews Paolla Jordan of the LaloBoy Foundation. In this emotional episode, Paolla shares her story of losing her son to suicide. She has since created the LaloBoy Foundation in his honor to help bring awareness to signs of suicide and hopefully prevent others from experiencing this loss. If you are experiencing thoughts of suicide or know someone who may be, please reach out for help. Call the National Suicide Hotline, available 24 hours a day at 1-800-273-8255. And now here's your host, personal trainer and stretch therapist, Gabrielle Mazar.
Welcome back to the Fit Minute Podcast, Fitness for Real People. I'm your host, Gabby Mazar, and on today's episode, I have Paolla Jordan, the founder of the LaloBoy Foundation. And today we're going to talk about a pretty deep and intense subject. I'm sure that a lot of people have dealt with this and can really relate to what we're going to discuss. The LaloBoy Foundation is going to be explained by Paolla, and so welcome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm having a hard time coming to words because this is such a touchy subject with people. We're talking about suicide, and recently you lost your son to suicide, and through that you developed this foundation, and we're going to talk about it. First, tell us about your son, because he was, very intelligent. He was the valedictorian of his school, and, go into a little bit about him, how old he was, and
certainly
tell us a little bit about him.
So, my son, Adrio Romine, started kindergarten at 4.5 years old. So he was always been a bright kid. He has always been that student that would be the first one finished and helping his peers in his classroom since kindergarten all the way up until the day he died. He's quiet. He just saw if there was a need, he would help them. It was just something that he likes to be needed, and it was really neat to see him do an act from his heart. I remember a particular story, him growing up. There's a kid by the name of Ben. He was autistic, and he was older than Adrio, and they were best friends. And he was always spending time with him. When he was doing the Olympics, he was going kind of slow. Adrio crossed the finish line and went back for him to help him cross the finish line. And that's the kind of kid that he started out to be. He continued to do that through the years. Not the parents, but the teachers actually utilized his talent in where, hey, Adrio, you're done. Why don't you go and help your peers? And so he'd gladly do it. He was a prankster. He was funny and such a goofball, but we're a goofball kind of family. So that was just the nice things that we could see about him. But fast forward to being a teenager, he continued to be quiet. I didn't have a lot of friends, but that was normal for us to see. So there was really no signs. I took some training back in February of 2018 with the Chandler Police for a whole entire month, in which I was learning a lot about regarding drugs and the opioids and sex trafficking and bullying and you name it. I took classes in that. But we were talking on suicide, and it was just interesting what they were saying about the symptoms. But I did lose my son May 11th, and there was, to me, raising him and being a self-employed mom for 21 years, I was able to be around both of my children and work my schedule around them and be a present mom with them. But there was no evidence or anything that seemed peculiar to lend me to see something that wasn't normal or set an alarm for me as his mom. There's other professionals that I know here in the Valley that said he was just probably one of those that actually fell under the radar, because sometimes they're just really too smart for their own good, and they hide those symptoms. So it wasn't evident until after he had passed away. And that's when I started to see, looking back, there was a sign. But hindsight's 20/20.
Right. The story behind your son, he had reached out on a group and been in contact with somebody. And Can you tell us a little bit about that, about what's going on with that, and what your course of action is now, because you're continuing to fight this with this particular individual?
That is correct. And so my message to parents out there is simply, it takes a village to raise our kids, but it's another thing also to keep our kids safe when it comes to internet safety. So on approximately April 1st, my son did go onto a chat room. It was over in Reddit. Reddit is used by many people all over the world, especially adults, where you can get recipes and anything you possibly want. But what people don't know, especially parents, is that it is also on the cusp of the dark web. There are people that are on there that don't have your children's best interest.
Predators.
That's correct.
Right.
And that's a great name to describe this situation. So there is a spot in Reddit, what is called the Suicide Watch. It's a place for people to go and talk with other people that are like mind, that are going through the same thing, and they just want people to understand them and what they're going through. So my son did go there. He was 17. And in that, he helped a couple of people. I read some of his threads in which he was helpful and positive and so on. But this particular person, they took their conversation off, to the side. It's in a private chat. And so my son solicited actually that it was with an adult. The adult, and my son being a minor, they had this conversation since around April 1st to the day of his death, actually leading hours before his death. He was in communication via text. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But the main thing is you read the dialogue from very beginning to end, and I've read it over 4 different times. It always presents itself differently, especially when your frame of mind changes. But basically, they were confiding in one another as to they're each suicidal, why they're not happy in their life, and so on. So they're building this rapport. But what was going on in the communication is that my son did have an interest in committing suicide. He was depressed, unbeknownst to us, but he was. And he's talking about different methods on how to take his life. And it appeared to me on the way the conversation was is that he was being herd into a different, herding like cattle into a certain area. And in that, they were talking more about using a gun. And in that conversation, it was very specific in nature onto how they would use a gun, how what size bullet is big enough, what type of gun is appropriate, what is lethal, what's not lethal. Should I go above my temple? At what angle should I do it? Should I go through my mouth? Should I go through the back of my head? I mean, this is a little graphic, but this is how they were talking. I do have 390 screenshots of these communications, which were very alarming. I was able to get my hands on this 2 days after he died. Many people that lose someone to suicide don't get answers ever. I was very fortunate to get this information, so I did turn to authorities with the information.
Can you tell me, this is very new, and for a parent that is going through this as well, what would you tell them? How could you reach out to them, and what would you say to them to help them get through this?
If their kid is on the internet chats, or are you saying that are in a state where they're in depression?
I would say after the fact, after losing a child or losing a loved one to this, how can they cope, and what would you say that has somewhat helped you? I mean, obviously you're still in this, and you will never ever move forward or get over this ever, losing a child. But how can you help someone else that's dealing with the loss of a loved one?
Absolutely. So there is a community out there, and at the end, I'll make sure I leave my number. I'm also an open book and be willing to talk to anybody that has actually lost a child. A lot of times there are some grieving programs out there, support groups, and I recently participated in one that did not resonate with me because they were talking about losing a spouse, and that program is called Grief Share. It's a fantastic program, but when you lose a child, it is not substantially the same. It's substantially different. There is support groups out there with impact that I've actually participated in, and I found it to be very helpful in the very beginning. There There is a support group over on Facebook that I belong to, and it's very supportive. It's just other people just like ourselves that have lost a child, and where you could just be real at 2 a.m, whatever you're going through, and they're literally there for you. I met them in person. I've had coffee with them, and it's just so nice to talk to someone that have been in my shoes and are still in my shoes. So they do exist out there. I would caution you to try to keep it to yourself, because I think the more that you talk about it, just with just someone just being with you, whether they're just elbow to elbow with you and not having to say a word, that sometimes just enough. There's people, friends in your community that they are awkward. They don't know what to say or how to respond to you. Just please don't take offense to that. They silently are in your corner, but it's just sometimes not in the way we need them. But you know what? They're doing the best that they can. And I know it's only been 4 months for me, but I've learned that there are people that truly care, that I personally like to hear my son's name. I don't mind people talking about him, and some of your friends and family don't want to bring his name up because they don't want to hurt you. And I would say to the friends and family out there, it's okay to talk about the child is no longer with us, because he was part of our memories, he was part of our lives, and it actually does bring some joy to talk about it. And I think that's the one thing that a lot of people don't understand when someone loses a child.
So looking back at the time leading up to him taking his own life, do you see signs now that you didn't see then?
The signs that I see now that I didn't see then was my son was a big gamer. He always had a guardian, so we didn't let him play like Grand Theft Auto, Halo, or Call of Duty. Those really, I call them aggressive videos. He played Destiny. His uncle was actually his guardian for years and years, which that's another conversation, but there's a lot of ways we can keep our child safe. And video games as a whole is not necessarily a bad thing. But what he told me one day was probably about maybe 3 weeks prior. I said, "Hey, I noticed you weren't playing video games. What's going on?" He says, "I hate video games. I'm not interested anymore." That should have been a sign for me. But what his habits were in the past is that he would binge watch, like Prince of Bel-Air, a lot of these family shows. He would binge watch. I guess because he's in between games, he won the game, so he had nothing to do. So I thought that was kind of one of those moments. But that should have been a clue. One of the other clues is that he did sleep a lot. Now, I'm a napper, and he was a napper, but he did sleep for long periods of time. And I thought that was normal. He's exhausted. He was a full-time college student. He took 2 sciences labs and everything. He's a pre-med student. So I'm figuring, okay, you know what? He's exhausted mentally. So that could have been a sign, but that's a mixed bag, really. Right. But he did sleep extensive periods of time. That's another symptom. The other one is eating. He's always been lazy when it comes to eating. He wanted mom to make him something. It made him feel special. So to me, that is a sign, but it wasn't at the time. That was normal for me. So there's just things like that. There was some negative talk, but not anything, I want to kill myself, I hate life. None of that was ever expressed, not with us. So yes, stepping back, I could definitely see some of those signs. But as far as characteristics of smoking and getting into drugs and irresponsibility, all of that wasn't not my son.
I think a lot of times we don't see the signs, and even if we do see something, it's subtle, or it's not something enough to raise an alarm. And then after the fact, we see a lot of things that were different that could have been signs, but it's very difficult, and then we go into this blame game. What could I have done differently? Why did this happen? Why did they do this? Was this my fault? And what we have to realize is that he was having those feelings, and it wasn't that nobody was reaching out, it's that nobody knew. So it's just a very hard thing because there's never any closure with it. And one thing that you've done to turn this horrible situation into something better for other people is to create and found the LaloBoy Foundation. Can you explain to us what that is, how it helps people, and why you wanted to do this?
Sure. Before we go into that, I just wanted to touch back on something you just said, is that the blame game is a very real thing. I did that for the first couple of months where I was beating myself up. But what I did come to grips with after at that time when rereading the entire Reddit thread, in which I do have preserved, I really, out of the fog after the funeral and all of that, I was able to rate it with another set of lenses. And in that, I can honestly say that it wasn't my fault. It's not it's a big statement, but my son was already thinking about this for some time before this person talked to him on Reddit. It just so happens is this person is an adult predator, and there were things that he could have actually said and done or make a report to because he was very active in taking his life. And so there was many opportunities in being able to deal with that. But going back to the blame game is that it wasn't my fault. And I know that I was a present parent, but there's a thing called concealed depression. It's an article that I read recently. It is fantastic. It really helps me understand my son more. And it's something that I have as a resource, and I can share that with whoever wants it.
Yeah, I'll share it on in the show notes as well, so people can.
Fantastic.
Can read that.
It really helped immensely for me to understand that can't turn back the clock, but one of the other signs that is evident to me now is this depression was going on in his senior year. Because the night before his graduation, being the valedictorian, he told me, I don't want to go to graduation. It's not a big deal. I thought he was being a prankster and, pulling my leg and whatnot, but he was serious. I don't need to go there. I don't need the accolades. I'm fine. I know what I accomplished. So he's very matter of fact about it. But that was the night before. This is the first time I'm actually sharing this. It was the night before that he didn't want to go to his graduation. I mean, I think he's glad he did, and he's had a lot of smiles, and he did hang out with his friends and all of that. But that was a conversation I did have with him the night before. So this depression has been there. It was just hidden extremely well.
And he was saying that some of his fears, he was afraid to be an adult. He was scared and didn't know what he wanted to do. And that's part of why he was feeling these feelings.
I think in part, this is, as his mother, is my interpretation, if you will. He was set to go live on campus. On June 24th of last year, after he graduated, he went to do his little orientation. He didn't want mom to go with him because he's 16. I'm grown. I don't need my mom. I said, Audrio, I really do need to go because you can't sign any papers. You're a minor, and I'm the one that has to sign for it. He still wound up going by himself. So when he came back home, how did it go? How did this go? How was the dorm? I didn't go to the dorm. Oh, how come? Because I had to have my parent. He didn't like that. So, but I mean, fast forward in that conversation, I just saw something in his face that I've never seen before, and it was fear. And he's like, Mom, can you tell me why I can't live at home? So senior year was actually kind of a difficult time for us because he had some attitude, that kind of a thing. But that's what teenager does exactly. And so with that, I told him, I said, look, there's going to be respect in this household, and I don't have to let you live here, but you need to respect here and do your part as being a member of our family. And so I said it's something I would definitely consider and get back with him on. But he was just really nervous energy. If I lived here, I can help you save money. I don't have to spend your money. I can go, I can do my part in doing this, help with the dogs, and, just going on and on about a list of things. So obviously this was weighing on him. So the long and short of it is that a couple days later, him and I did talk, and we did do an agreement, and he did sign it. Actually, he was on his way to Japan. And we had a wonderful, wonderful year. He did live at home. Went to Barrett, and he could have stayed there, but he didn't want to. So he was just not ready to be an adult. And I make this statement, and even you can have the brightest child like mine, or you can just have your child, and who I don't know right now. But the main thing that we need to understand as parents is that the job of our as a parent is not to get them to 18. It's to make sure that they have the capabilities and the tools to be able to handle the real world, because there's a lot out there. Let's remember.
Cope.
Exactly. When we were kids, we didn't have all the answers. So we really need to be very mindful and have these conversations before graduation, maybe during senior year.
And also, when we were kids, we didn't have Reddit. We didn't have Google. We didn't have all of this information at our fingertips. The world is so very different now than it was even 20 years ago. I mean, even when I was in high school, there were cell phones, but they were bricks. It was like Saved by the Bell, that block phone that
Exactly.
you had to have plugged into your car lighter. It's like, it is so very different, and how we're handling it and how you handle it as a parent, we're still learning these things and trying to understand all of it. How do we raise our kids with cell phones? How do we raise our kids with YouTube? How do we raise our kids with social media? I mean, social media wasn't a thing when I was in high school. That was not a thing. It was that dial-up AOL.
Yeah.
It took 15 minutes just to log on, and by the time you log on, you're like, all right, I'm so over this. Like,
Exactly.
instant message, great. But, that's something that we really have to consider in raising our children now. I don't have kids, but,
No,
but it
absolutely.
is. I mean, that's one of the reasons that it scares me to have children, because it is completely unknown. It's completely unknown.
So the one thing I will say to you parents is, just because your child graduates from high school, it does not mean that they are ready to be an adult. I can't emphasize that enough. And it took guts for him to admit that, he wanted to stay home and so on. So when he finished his freshman year, he went to Oregon on the 7th of May. And on May 4th, we had a conversation. He says, Mom, I want to know, can I stay here for another year? And I have a rental. My daughter lives there. And I said, well, I have an extra room over at the rental. It's close to ASU. I said, would you be interested in that? He says, no, I'm not. He says, I'd like to live at home. And I said, okay. We had a wonderful year. That was great. I would love that. So it was his choice. And so he planned all his classes for his sophomore year. He was going to live at home. He went off to Oregon. Never saw him again. So it was just so mind-boggling, because he was preparing for his next year, but marginal shifts do happen.
So let's go back to the LaloBoy Foundation and tell me a little bit about it.
So basically, by trade, I'm a divorce mediator, and I work with families for the last 10 years. And so I do talk about the co-parenting. I talk a lot about parenting nuggets of any kind. But one of the things that I do talk about is counseling, and the necessity of counseling, not only for the parents, but necessity of counseling for the children. What I'm finding just with my own families is that they are on an extremely tight budget. One is going to lose their insurance out of this situation, and medical costs become an issue, and the copays and the deductibles and everything. And so counseling is not higher in their priority, because they've got to put groceries on the table, pay utilities, and have a roof over their head. So just with these families that I work with is that they don't know how they would pay for counseling. And then I also am a divorce care facilitator, and I've been doing that for 6.5 years with my husband, where we have a support group for divorce. And we talk about counseling, and they don't have the money or the resources, and asks for resources for free counseling and so on. So I've been around divorce for 10 years. And so when he passed away, he did get counseling services. His also I've had some issues about getting counseling service because his father was not on the same page with me on getting the counseling services. But eventually we got on that page with the help by the court to get him these services. So I know that it's helpful in how my kids were able to receive benefit, but it's another thing to be able to have the means to be able to pay for that. Because the insurance has changed so much and so rapidly in the last 5 years, I've been seeing a strong need for counseling services, because even if they were to get on access, they only have certain limitations on that. So what we're trying to do with LaloBoy Foundation is to raise funds in which we would scholarship families for counseling services. It's mainly for the children first, but secondary would be to family counseling in a group setting. Also to provide support services. So if we have a waiting list to get into counseling, we would also have support groups for the youth to be able to speak in that. That's going to be down the road. But my idea is to partner up with any other mental health professionals that are out there. I would love to know who you are that are passionate about what you do, but also to work it out so that I could scholarship and work with you individually to get these services for these families. So I'm not looking to take a salary of any kind. I am going back into public speaking. It's one of my passions, but I'm passionate about parents. I'm passionate about children. I'm passionate about the village and having the tools to act in crisis or just raising kids in today's times. So I'm looking to speak at schools. If there's a PTO, I would speak at the PTO to talk with other parents. So that's where I'm going to be lending myself, to be able to speak on it. I've always been complimented over the years about my parenting style and effective parenting. It's something it's not foreign to me, but I just want everybody to be equipped. But I want these kids to get the counseling services they need, so I could at least speak to that.
I think that people don't think of counseling in a way that is necessary. I think people think, oh, well, I'm not crazy. There's nothing wrong with me. Why do I need counseling? But what we need to understand is that, especially, working with families in divorce, a lot of times the parents aren't on the same page and they're back and forth. And the person that's affected the most in that relationship, or non-relationship rather, is the child. And even though you don't see necessarily something wrong with your child, that's a trauma that they're trying to cope with, because they don't understand that it's not because of them that their parents are separating. Their belief or their thought sometimes goes to, this is my fault, mommy and daddy don't love each other, and how they deal with it. So even something as small as taking a child to counseling to cope with that, and to really let them know that it's okay, that, mommy and daddy are better this way, they can be better parents this way, and it's not their fault, I think is huge. But, I think traditionally we think of counseling or psychiatry even as more of something that you go to when something is wrong, or when something, when you're crazy. But it's not. It's something, my boyfriend and I, we go to counseling often because we try to deal with issues in our relationship to make us stronger, because I don't want to harbor anger or hate, or, not that I hate him, but, it helps you to understand the other person's side of the story, or just to understand why you're feeling a certain way, or why, you're reacting a certain way. And if you have a third party, a mediator, a counselor, to say, this person feels this way, or you're saying these words, why are you saying it this way, and why do you feel that way? Mm-hmm. And even if it's just in yourself, it might help in that situation, to maybe prevent to prevent suicide, or to prevent terrible things from happening. So getting early intervention, even if you don't think something is wrong, can definitely help.
So some of my training, I have actually learned that Counseling is a tool. And I'm in my second marriage, and we get a tune-up. I like to call it a tune-up.
Yeah.
And it's actually been really helpful. A couple years ago, I needed a tune-up. I was going through something going on, and it was super helpful. And so there is no shame in that. And that's kind of what I do share with my parents, is that it's just getting some tools. And so it goes back to when the kids are little. Let's say they're in elementary school. It is not a bad idea to maybe find a counselor, maybe in your neighborhood or by referral of a friend that has a child in counseling, and have an introductory meeting with your child with that counselor. And then probably about 5th or 6th grade. And then they're going into junior high. So let's just say summer of after they just graduated from 6th grade, they're going to be going over this big threshold of going into junior high. They're going through a new season, and everything's going to look different. There's going to be different structures and so on, and it can be very overwhelming to the child. So that's a great opportunity to make another appointment with the counselor, just to kind of brush up after maybe they started after a week or two, or just prior to, because there might be some anxiety that they are holding on to. And then there's high school, and they probably would need a counselor more often because their hormones, they're growing,
absolutely.
and
Hormones,
everything.
Emotions, you're angry, you're
Subjects.
happy, you don't know how to deal
Absolutely.
with puberty and
so what you've
relationships.
Just done, you've just taught your kid that in elementary school that it's okay to talk to someone that's not mom or dad.
Yes.
I think parents take it very personal that why don't my kids talk to me? And sometimes it's easier for them to talk to someone else because they don't feel that they'll be judged. So be okay with your kids talking to someone other than you, whether it be an uncle, an aunt, a grandma, a grandpa, or a counselor, or a teacher. It's important that they're talking to someone, because what's happening in today's time is kids are talking to kids and are not talking to enough adults. So I was told this. I think it's great sound advice, simply to give those introductory meetings with their counselor. So if there is in crisis, they can be asking for counseling on their own and feel comfortable they already have a relationship with one, and they kind of are on speed dial. And that also goes with parents. We all go through different stages, and we get overwhelmed as parents. It's okay. But what happens is when you're talking about counseling, it's not so much that my family as a whole saying that counseling isn't necessary. It's the associated cost. And that's why we want to get these resources and have referral partners that we can help them and help these families with their specialty. So just know that dialoguing about it and being okay with having tune-ups in our lives is really, really okay.
Absolutely. And I think it's great that you're trying to reach people in that way, because you're right, the associated cost with it is often the deterrent as to why people do not seek help, whether it's medically, mentally, physically, whatever it is. It's very off-putting, and people have that fear, I can't afford it. But you need it. You need to talk to somebody, and it helps for somebody that's not your parent or that's not your friend to say or repeat back to you what you're saying. A lot of times you don't listen, you're not listening to what a parent's saying, but an unbiased party, they're not saying something to you because they love you. They're not saying something to you because they don't want to hurt your feelings. They're saying something to you because this is what it is. This is what you just said to me, and I'm telling you what this means and why, what my interpretation of it is from a counseling standpoint, So I think it's great what you're doing. If anybody wants more information on LaloBoy Foundation, if anybody needs help through a divorce or with counseling, or needs, to be directed in a certain way, or even just to talk to Paolla about losing a child or going through what she went through. And if you've gone through this, she is here to be an open book, to be a resource for you, to help you through this. You really want to help people.
Absolutely.
So I'll have all of your information in my show notes. But if people want to reach you or find out more about the LaloBoy Foundation, how can they?
They can reach me at 480-612-4656. That's 480-612-4656.
Okay. I will have more information on her. So please, if anybody has any suspicion or any idea of someone in their life, some loved one, please reach out to them, because they may be going through something that you don't understand, and they might need the help that they're not getting or they don't think that they're getting.
So there's one more thing I wanted to add, and that is that for you parents, in my situation, I don't want you to become a member of my club. But many of you don't know, but there is no law on the books right now for an adult to talk to a minor child about self-harm or suicide. That is the midst of what I'm going through right now. It's very upsetting. This whole process of 4 months, they basically closed the case in 3 jurisdictions. California, Oregon, and Arizona were affected by this case. There was a joint task that was Arizona and Oregon working together on this. But I did talk to the FBI. I did talk to Scottsdale Cybercrimes. All of them said that their hands are tied. There is no law, and you need to talk to your lawmaker. So right now, I've reopened the case over in Oregon. The sheriff's department there is actually taking it upon himself to see about what they can do to change legislation, and reached out to the state senator and the state representative, and I think it's the AG's office in Klamath. They are actually looking at changing the statute or something like that. So I'm supposed to do an interview shortly with them. And here in Arizona, I do have a representative here that is supposed to meet with me pretty soon and being able to help me put something together. So I won't stop. But it needs to be illegal. It's not taking, this is an argument people bring up, is that it's infringing on their civil liberties for, being able to have the freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is in our Constitution, but in freedom of speech, it does not talk about inflicting harm on other citizens, upon themselves.
Especially a minor.
And that's the situation. I'm only going after the minor aspect because this is about my son, and thereafter, once we get that into play, there will be other things that I want to go after as far as like for special needs or vulnerable adults and that kind of a thing. So everything is a step-by-step process, but there is no law. So what I ask you parents to do is please enlist in your parent controls on the computers and other devices, and also using a program like Bark. I have a link that you can actually use for trying it out. But at any rate, these resources are out there, but it does take parents and the village to help keep your kids safe.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story. And we will all think about your son, and all of us hopefully can help in some way. So please reach out. But really, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So thanks everybody for listening, and we will see you next week.
Thank you so much for listening to the Fit Minute Podcast, Fitness for Real People, with your host, Gabrielle Mazar. If you'd like more information on today's episode, you can find it in the show notes, or you can find it on Gabrielle's website at www.healthybodyworksaz.com. You can also find out more information about Gabrielle's fitness vacations. Be a guest for the all-inclusive Fitcation to Kauai, February 29th through March 5th, 2020, or join us in Banff, Canada, July 25th through August 4th, 2020. Be sure to share the show, give this podcast a great review, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Join us next week to hear more stories from people just like you. This has been the Fit Minute Podcast, Fitness for Real People with Gabrielle Mazar.